Captain Richard Caldwell saw his new co-pilot walking across the tarmac and decided, right then and there, that she didn't belong. Despite his 30 years of experience and 10,000 hours in the air, his massive ego clouded his judgment. He didn't see a colleague, he saw a mistake. He refused to fly, hurled insults, and demanded her removal because she didn't look the part. But Richard forgot one crucial check: the ownership of the aircraft. What happens when the person you humiliate turns out to be the person who owns the very plane you're sitting in? You're about to find out. This is the story of the pilot who refused to fly with a black co-pilot and the brutal karma that followed. The morning air at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was biting, a crisp 34 degrees that made your breath hang in the air like cigarette smoke. It was 5:45 a.m., the golden hour for private aviation, where the masters of the universe boarded their $50 million chariots to conquer Wall Street, London, or Dubai before lunch. Captain Richard Caldwell stood beneath the swept wing of a Gulfstream G650ER, arguably the finest piece of machinery ever built for civilian flight. He ran a gloved hand along the leading edge of the wing, checking for frost. He was a man of routine, a man of tradition. At 58 years old, Richard looked every inch the quintessential airline captain. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, a jawline that had hardened with age, and a uniform that was pressed to military standards. He had spent 20 years flying wide bodies for Delta before moving to the private sector. The money was better, but more importantly, the clientele was better. No crying babies, no drunk tourists, just serious men doing serious business. Fuel load is confirmed, Captain. The ground handler, a young man named Toby, said, holding out a clipboard. Richard signed it with a flourish, barely looking at the boy. Make sure the GPU is connected until the last minute, Toby. The client hates a cold cabin. Yes, sir. Also, your first officer just pulled in at the gate. Richard checked his Breitling watch. About time. Dispatch said they were sending a substitute. My usual guy, Davidson, is out with the flu. Hopefully they sent someone with actual stick time and not some simulator junkie. Richard turned his gaze toward the FBO, fixed base operator, entrance. He was expecting to see a familiar face, maybe one of the old boys from the reserve list, someone like Miller or O'Connell. Instead, he saw a small silver Audi pull up to the restricted access gate. The driver stepped out. Richard squinted. It was a woman. That wasn't unusual in itself. He had flown with women before, though he privately complained they were too emotional for severe turbulence. But as she grabbed her flight bag and walked toward the jet, Richard's eyes narrowed further. She was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s. She was black, her hair pulled back in an immaculate, tight bun. She wore the standard white pilot's shirt and black trousers, but on her they looked tailored, sharp. She walked with a stride that ate up the tarmac, confident and direct. Richard felt a prickle of irritation. This was his relief pilot? For a transatlantic flight to London. He stayed under the wing, crossing his arms as she approached. He decided to let her walk all the way to him, rather than meeting her halfway. "Good morning," she said as she reached the aircraft. Her voice was calm, melodic, but carried a steel core. She extended a hand. "I'm First Officer Nia Cross. I'm filling in for Davidson." Richard didn't take her hand. He pretended to be inspecting a rivet on the engine cowling. After a long, awkward silence, he finally looked down at her. "You're the relief?" Richard asked, his tone flat. "That's correct, Captain." "You look like you should be handing out hot towels in the back, not calculating fuel burn," Richard sneered, turning back to the plane. "Did dispatch run out of pilots? Or is this some kind of diversity internship program?" Naya's hand dropped to her side, but her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She just watched him with unsettling intensity. "I have 5,000 hours, Captain. Type-rated on the G650, the Global 7500 and the Challenger. I assure you, I know which way is up." Richard let out a short, derisive laugh. 5,000 hours? Doing what? Hauling cargo in a Cessna, flying banners over the beach. He stepped closer, towering over her. "Listen to me, sweetheart. This isn't a training flight. We have a VVIP client today. Mr. Preston Sterling. You know who that is?" "I am aware of the passenger manifest," Naya said quietly. "Sterling is old money. He expects excellence. He doesn't want to see a diversity hire fumbling with the FMS, flight management system." Richard pointed a finger at her chest, stopping just an inch away. "You sit in the right seat. You touch nothing unless I tell you to. You speak only when spoken to. If you screw up even a radio frequency, I will have you off this plane and back to flight school before the wheels are up. Do we understand each other?" Naya held his gaze. For a second, Richard thought he saw a flicker of amusement in her dark eyes, which infuriated him even more. She should be scared. She should be apologetic. "I understand you perfectly, Captain Caldwell," Naya said. "Good. Now stow your bag and get the catering sorted. The flight attendant is late too, so you might as well make yourself useful." "I'm a pilot, Captain. Not a stewardess," Naya stated firmly. "On my ship, you're whatever I say you are," Richard snapped. "Now move." He brushed past her, shoulder-checking her slightly as he headed for the stairs. He didn't see the way Naya looked at the plane, then at him. He didn't see her pull out her phone and send a single text message. He just climbed the stairs, muttering to himself, "Unbelievable. The world's going to hell." He had no idea that the hell he was worried about was already waiting for him in the cockpit. The cockpit of the Gulfstream GR6450ER is a sanctuary of technology and luxury. Screens glowed with avionics data, the smell of expensive leather and conditioned air filling the small space. For Richard, this was his throne room. He settled into the left seat, the captain's seat, and began his flow, flipping switches with practiced ease. He heard Naya enter behind him. She moved quietly, efficiently stowing her kit bag and settling into the right seat. Richard watched her out of the corner of his eye. She moved with an economy of motion that usually signaled experience, but his bias blinded him to it. He saw only an intrusion. "Do you know how to initialize the IRS?" Richard asked condescendingly, referring to the inertial reference system. Naya reached forward. Her fingers danced over the keypad. "Position initialized. Coordinates verified against GPS 1 and 2. Aligning now. Time to align. 7 minutes." She did it faster than he could have. Richard grunted. "Lucky guess. Don't get cocky." "It's not luck, Captain. It's the checklist." "Don't quote the manual to me," Richard snapped, adjusting his headset. "I was flying jets when you were still in diapers. I know this bird better than I know my ex-wife." "I'm sure the plane appreciates the comparison," Naya murmured. Richard whipped his head around. "What was that?" "I said, wind data is uploaded. We're looking at a 30-knot headwind over the Atlantic. We might want to request a higher altitude early to save fuel." "I'll decide the altitude," Richard barked. "You just handle the radio. And for God's sake, articulate. I don't want ATC asking us to repeat ourselves because of slang." Naya paused. The air in the cockpit suddenly felt heavier than the pressurized steel around them. "Slang?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "I speak the Queen's English, Captain. I was educated at Oxford." "What exactly are you implying?" Richard waved a hand dismissively. "You know what I mean. Urban vernacular. Keep it professional. This is Teterboro, not Atlanta." It was a blatant, ugly racism, stripped of any subtlety. Richard felt good about it. He wanted to rattle her. He wanted her to quit. He didn't want to share his cockpit with her. He wanted Davidson back. Good old Davidson, who laughed at his jokes and agreed that the country was going down the drain. Naya slowly turned her chair to face the instruments. She took a deep breath. "Captain, I am here to ensure the safety of this flight. My ethnicity has nothing to do with my ability to communicate with air traffic control. I suggest we focus on the departure procedure." "I'm focusing on the fact that I don't trust you," Richard said, leaning in. "I checked your file with the agency just now on my iPad. It's thin, very thin. Private contracting. No major airline history. Who are you flying for? Cartels? Rappers?" "Private owners," Naya said. "High net worth individuals who value discretion." "Right. Which means you were a glorified chauffeur," Richard scoffed. "You probably let the autopilot do everything while you took selfies for Instagram." Suddenly, the ground frequency crackled to life. "Gulfstream 7 Alpha Quebec, Teterboro ground. You are cleared to taxi to runway 19 via Kilo, hold short of Lima." Richard keyed to the mic, but Naya beat him to it. "Cleared to taxi runway 19 via Kilo, hold short of Lima, Gulfstream 7 Alpha Quebec," Nia said. Her voice was crisp, professional, and authoritative. Richard glared at her. "I didn't tell you to take the comms." "You were busy insulting me, Captain. I thought one of us should fly the plane." Richard's face turned a shade of crimson. He slammed his hand on the center console. "That's it. You are insubordinate. You are arrogant. And you are unqualified." He unbuckled his harness. "Where are you going?" Naya asked calmly. "I'm going to the cabin," Richard spat. "The client, Mr. Sterling, will be here in 10 minutes. I'm going to call the agency and tell them to send someone else. I'm not flying with you. I'd rather cancel the flight than sit next to an affirmative action mistake for 7 hours." Nia didn't move to stop him. She didn't plead. She simply turned her head and looked him dead in the eye. "You really don't want to do that, Richard." She used his first name. It was a power move. "Excuse me?" I said, "You don't want to make that call. You're going to embarrass yourself." "Watch me," Richard growled. He squeezed out of the pilot's seat, his knees cracking. "You stay here. Don't touch anything. If I come back and you've so much as adjusted the thermostat, I'll have your license revoked." He stormed out of the cockpit, slamming the reinforced door behind him. Naya sat alone in the silence of the flight deck. The avionics hummed softly. She looked out the window at the grey runway stretching out before them. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone again. She dialed a number. "Hello?" "Yes," Nia said into the phone. "It's Nia. We have a situation. He's refusing to fly. Yes, he's going to call the agency. No, let him do it. Let him dig the hole a little deeper. I want him to say it to Mr. Sterling's face." "Yes." "Okay. See you in 5 minutes." She hung up and leaned back, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. Richard Caldwell thought he was the gatekeeper of the sky. He was about to find out he was just the doorman. The main cabin of the Gulfstream G6R50ER was a stark contrast to the utilitarian coldness of the cockpit. It was a tube of beige leather, high-gloss walnut veneer, and gold-plated fixtures. It smelled of money. Literally. The scent of fresh orchids in the vases, mixed with the faint aroma of the premium leather seats. Captain Richard Caldwell paced the length of the aisle, his phone pressed to his ear. He was furious. His heart rate was elevated, not from stress, but from righteous indignation. He felt like the guardian of the gates, holding back the barbarian hordes of incompetence. "Steve, listen to me," Richard hissed into the phone, speaking to the chief pilot at the charter agency. "I don't care what her resume says. She's got an attitude problem. She's hostile. She challenged my authority before we even ran the checklists." On the other end of the line, Steve sounded weary. "Richard, look, Nia Cross came highly recommended. Her paperwork is flawless. We don't have anyone else available on short notice. The client is arriving in 5 minutes." "Then stall him," Richard barked, checking his reflection in the bulkhead mirror. He adjusted his tie. "I'm telling you, she's a risk. She doesn't know the systems. I asked her about the IRS alignment, and she gave me lip. I'm not signing the flight release with her name on it. If anything happens, it's my license on the line, not hers. I worked 30 years to get here, Steve. I'm not throwing it away for some diversity quota." "Richard, be careful what you say," Steve warned, his voice dropping. "We are on a recorded line." "I don't give a damn if the FAA is listening," Richard shouted, losing his composure. "Get me a real pilot. Get me Miller. Get me anyone who actually belongs in a cockpit. If she stays, the plane stays on the ground. Period." He hung up before Steve could argue. He felt a surge of power. He was the captain. The captain's word was law. In the maritime tradition that aviation borrowed from, he was the absolute dictator of this vessel. He heard the sound of a heavy car door closing outside. He looked out the cabin window. A black Cadillac Escalade had pulled up next to the plane. The client was here. Preston Sterling emerged from the vehicle. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of white hair and a suit that cost more than Richard's car. Sterling was a hedge fund manager known for hostile takeovers. He was not a man who tolerated excuses. Richard took a deep breath, put on his best customer service smile, the one he had perfected over 2 decades at Delta, and opened the main cabin door. The stairs lowered automatically. Sterling walked up, followed by his personal assistant, a nervous-looking young man clutching a briefcase. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Richard boomed, standing at the top of the stairs, blocking the entrance slightly. "Welcome aboard. An absolute pleasure to be flying you to London today." Sterling didn't smile. He checked his watch. "Captain Caldwell, we are scheduled for a 6 a.m. departure. It is 5:08. Are the engines spooled?" "Ah, well, that's actually what I needed to speak to you about, sir," Richard said, his smile faltering just a fraction. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning in as if sharing a state secret. "We have a slight personnel issue. The agency, in their infinite wisdom, sent a substandard co-pilot to fill in for my usual guy." Sterling's eyebrows knitted together. "Substandard? Is the plane safe or not?" "The plane is magnificent, Mr. Sterling. I've personally inspected every inch of it," Richard assured him, patting the fuselage. "The problem is the person in the right seat. She's inexperienced, a bit aggressive. Frankly, I don't feel comfortable trusting your safety to her. I've demanded a replacement. It might take an hour to get someone competent out here." Sterling's face darkened. "An hour? I have a dinner meeting in Canary Wharf at 7 p.m. I don't have an hour. I understand, sir, truly. But safety is paramount," Richard said, playing his trump card. "I'd rather arrive late than not arrive at all. You pay for the best, Mr. Sterling. I'm just trying to ensure you get the best. You don't want an amateur up front." Sterling looked annoyed, but he nodded. He was a businessman. He understood risk management. "Fine, but I want to be in the air as soon as possible. Where is this risk now?" "She's in the cockpit," Richard sneered, "probably taking selfies." At that moment, the cockpit door opened. Nia Cross stepped out. She wasn't holding a phone. She was holding a heavy flight manual and a clipboard. She looked immaculate, professional, and completely unbothered. She looked at Richard, then at Preston Sterling. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Naya said, her voice projecting clearly over the whine of the auxiliary power unit. "My name is Naya Cross. We are fueled, catered, and cleared for our slot time. The aircraft is 100% ready for departure." Sterling looked at Nia, then back at Richard. "She says we're ready. You say we're not." Richard felt the blood rush to his face. She was undermining him in front of the VVIP. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," Richard snapped, turning to face Naya. "I told you to stay in the cockpit." "And I told you, Captain, that I am a professional," Naya replied, stepping into the main cabin area. She placed the clipboard on the credenza. "Mr. Sterling, there is no technical reason for a delay. The only reason we are still on the ground is because Captain Caldwell refuses to operate the aircraft with a black woman in the right seat." The silence that followed was deafening. The air in the cabin seemed to vanish, sucked out by the sheer audacity of the moment. Richard's mouth fell open, then snapped shut as rage took over. He couldn't believe she had played the race card, in front of the client, in front of Preston Sterling. "How dare you?" Richard whispered, his voice trembling with fury. He stepped toward her, invading her personal space. "You think you can come on my ship and accuse me of racism? I flew with more minorities in the 90s than you've ever met. This isn't about your skin color, sweetheart. It's about your competence." "You haven't seen me fly," Naya countered, holding her ground. She didn't retreat an inch. "You haven't asked me a single technical question that I didn't answer correctly. You assumed I was a flight attendant. You assumed I was a diversity hire. You assumed I flew for rappers." "Those were your words, Richard." Sterling cleared his throat. It was a loud, impatient sound. "Captain Caldwell, is this true?" Richard spun around to face Sterling. "Sir, she's twisting everything. She's insubordinate. Look at her. She's arguing with her captain in front of a client. That alone is grounds for dismissal. That proves she doesn't have the temperament for this job." Richard pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get your bag. Get off this plane. Now." Naya crossed her arms. "No." "Excuse me?" "I said no," Naya repeated calmly. "I am the assigned first officer for this flight. I have a contract. I have a flight plan filed. I am not leaving just because your ego is threatened." Richard laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "My ego? Listen to me, you little affirmative action charity case. I am the pilot in command. By federal aviation law, I have the final authority. If I say you are a threat to safety, you are removed. I will call the police if I have to. Do you want to be dragged off the tarmac in handcuffs? Because I will make that happen." Sterling looked at his watch again. "Captain, I don't care about your internal squabbles. I am paying $12,000 an hour for this charter. If you can't fly, I'll find a company that can." "Mr. Sterling, please," Richard pleaded, switching modes instantly back to sycophant. "Give me 10 minutes. Security will remove her. My replacement will be here, and we will make up the time in the air. I am doing this for you. You don't want her landing this plane in a crosswind." Richard turned back to Nia, his eyes full of malice. "Last chance. Walk away, and maybe I won't report you to the FAA. Maybe I'll let you keep your little license so you can go back to flying crop dusters. But if you make me call security, I will ruin you. You will never sit in a cockpit again. I know people. I know the examiners. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every reputable agency on the East Coast." It was a total power play. Richard felt strong. He had the title, the uniform, the history, and the perceived alliance of the wealthy white man standing next to him. He was crushing a bug. Naya looked at him. Her expression shifted. The professional mask slipped just a fraction, revealing something else underneath. Not fear, not anger, pity. "You really think you have that much power, Richard?" she asked softly. "I know I do," Richard sneered. He pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling Port Authority police. Trespassing on a private aircraft." "Mr. Sterling," Naya said, ignoring Richard and turning her attention to the client. "I apologize for this display. It is unprofessional and embarrassing. However, Captain Caldwell has made it clear he will not perform his duties." "Damn right I won't," Richard yelled while dialing. "Mr. Sterling," Nia continued, her voice steady, "if the captain is incapacitated by his own prejudice, we have a problem. However, I can offer a solution." "You can't offer anything," Richard shouted. "You're fired. You're done." "Mr. Sterling," Nia said, locking eyes with the billionaire, "how well do you know the owner of this aircraft?" Sterling paused. "I've never met the owner. I charter through the holding company, Vanguard Aviation." "Why?" "Vanguard Aviation," Nia nodded. "A shell company, privately held." "What does this have to do with anything?" Richard interrupted, the phone ringing in his ear. "Hello? Police?" "Yes, I have a security situation at the General Aviation Terminal." "Richard, hang up the phone," Nia said. Her voice changed. It wasn't the voice of a co-pilot anymore. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders that resulted in people losing their jobs. "Or what?" Richard challenged, holding the phone away from his ear but not hanging up. "Or you will be in breach of your contract with Vanguard Aviation," Nia said. "I don't work for Vanguard. I work for the agency." "The agency works for Vanguard," Nia corrected him. She took a step forward. "And Vanguard works for me." Richard froze. "What?" Nia reached into her blazer pocket. Richard flinched, as if she were pulling a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a sleek, black ID card holder. She flipped it open. It wasn't a pilot's license. It was a corporate ID. Vanguard Aviation Group, Nia Cross, Chief Executive Officer and Founder. "You see, Richard," Nia said, her voice dripping with ice, "I don't just fly this plane. I bought it. I bought it 3 years ago when I sold my tech startup in Silicon Valley. I own Vanguard Aviation. I own the hangar we are parked in front of. I own the fuel truck you just signed the receipt for." She gestured around the cabin. "I created this charter company because I love aviation, but I hate the politics. I fly the line once a month under my maiden name to check on my assets and ensure my standards are being met." She looked Richard up and down with devastating scrutiny. "And today, Captain, you have failed that inspection in every conceivable way." Richard's phone slipped from his hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. The dispatcher on the other end was still asking, "Hello? Sir? Is there an emergency?" Sterling's eyes went wide. He looked from the ID card to Nia. A slow smile spread across the billionaire's face. He recognized the look of a fellow predator. "Well," Sterling said, chuckling dryly, "this is a plot twist." Richard stood paralyzed. His brain couldn't process the information. The girl, the diversity hire, the chauffeur. She was the CEO? She was the owner? "No," Richard stammered, his face draining of color, turning a sickly pale shade of gray. That's impossible. I'm what, Richard?" Nia stepped closer, and this time, Richard was the one who shrank back. "Say it. Say what you were going to say." Richard couldn't speak. His throat was dry as sand. The realization of what he had done, the insults, the threats, the crop duster comments, came crashing down on him like a collapsing building. "I didn't think so," Nia said. She turned to the open door where the ground crew was waiting. "Toby!" The young ground handler ran up the stairs. "Yes, Mom?" Escort Mr. Caldwell off my aircraft, Naya ordered, pointing at Richard. He is no longer authorized to be on the premises. But who will fly? Richard gasped, finding his voice in a panic. You can't fly this alone. It requires 2 crew members. Nia looked at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, my chief pilot, Steve, who Richard just screamed at, is actually in the FBO office. I had him on standby in case Richard didn't work out. He can be here in 2 minutes. She looked back at Richard. Get off my plane, Richard, before I have you charged with trespassing on my property. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the distant whine of a fuel truck moving across the tarmac and the hum of the avionics cooling fans. But to Captain Richard Caldwell, the silence was a roaring vacuum, sucking the air out of his lungs. He looked at Nia Cross. He looked at the ID card still held in her hand, the gold lettering of Chief Executive Officer catching the cabin lights. He looked at Preston Sterling, the billionaire client who was now looking at Richard as if he were a smudge of dirt on an expensive rug. Richard started, his voice cracking. The bluster was gone. The captain persona had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, aging man who realized he had just set fire to his own pension. Ms. Cross, Nia, I didn't know. That is the point, Richard, Nia said, her voice devoid of sympathy. She snapped the ID holder shut with a sharp click. You didn't know. You didn't bother to find out. You saw a black woman, and you decided she was beneath you. You decided she was incompetent. You decided to humiliate her. I was trying to protect the client. Richard grasped at the straw, turning to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, you understand, right? In this industry, you have to be careful. I was just being cautious. Sterling adjusted his cufflinks, his expression bored. There is a difference between caution and stupidity, Captain. You insulted the owner of the company you work for. You delayed my flight. And you showed a complete lack of judgment. If you manage a cockpit the way you manage people, I wouldn't trust you to fly a kite. Sterling turned his back on Richard and sat down in the plush leather club seat, opening his newspaper. It was the ultimate dismissal. He had ceased to acknowledge Richard's existence. Nia pointed to the door. Toby is waiting. Richard looked at the open door. The cold wind blew in, chilling his sweat-drenched skin. He looked back at the cockpit. His sanctuary. He had spent his life striving to sit in that left seat. Being removed from a flight was a stain that never washed off. Being removed by the owner for racism was a career death sentence. Please, Richard whispered, desperate now. Nia, Ms. Cross, I have a mortgage. My daughter is in college. If you fire me like this, if you report this, you should have thought about your daughter before you called her mother's generation diversity hires, Nia said coldly. And I'm not firing you, Richard. That's for HR to handle. I'm simply removing a security risk from my aircraft. Hand over your badge and your ramp pass. My ramp pass. Now. With trembling hands, Richard unclipped his airport security badge and his company ID from his shirt. He placed them in Nia's outstretched hand. He felt naked without them. They were his identity. Get your bag, Nia ordered. Richard stumbled into the cockpit. He grabbed his flight bag. He looked at the flight instruments one last time, the screens he had boasted about knowing so well. They seemed to mock him now. He dragged his bag out, the wheels bumping over the threshold. He walked to the door. Toby, the young ground handler he had ignored earlier, was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Toby wasn't smiling, but there was a look of intense satisfaction in his eyes. He had heard the yelling. Everyone had. Richard took the first step down. It was the longest walk of his life. Every step down the air stairs felt like a hammer blow. He could feel the eyes of the other ground crew members on him. He could see the pilots of a nearby Challenger jet watching from their cockpit window. The world of private aviation is small. News travels faster than a jet stream. By the time he reached the bottom of the stairs, the text messages would already be flying. "Did you see Caldwell? Got kicked off the bird. Who kicked him?" "The owner. Turns out the co-pilot he was hazing owns the damn plane." Richard reached the tarmac. His legs felt like jelly. Just then, a golf cart sped up to the aircraft. Steve, the chief pilot, jumped out. He was breathless, wearing a partially zipped flight jacket over his uniform. He carried a headset bag. Steve looked at Richard, then up at Nia, who was standing at the top of the stairs like a queen on a battlement. "I'm here, Ms. Cross," Steve called out. "Ready to go." "Good to see you, Steve," Nia said, her voice warming instantly. "Hop in. Mr. Sterling is eager to depart." Steve brushed past Richard without saying a word. He didn't even look at him. The Brotherhood of Pilots was strong, but it didn't extend to men who humiliated the boss. Richard was a pariah. "Richard!" Nia called out one last time from the top of the stairs. Richard turned around, hope flaring in his chest. Maybe she would show mercy. Maybe this was just a lesson. "Yes?" "Don't wait in the crew lounge," Nia said, her voice carrying over the wind. "I've already emailed security. Your access to the FBO has been revoked. You can wait for your Uber on the public sidewalk." She hit the button. The electric motors whirred, and the stairs began to retract, slowly closing the door on Richard's world. He stood there, alone on the vast grey concrete, holding his bag, as the door sealed shut with a finality that echoed in his soul. He watched as the engines of the G6050ER spooled up, the high-pitched whine rising to a roar. The blast of the jet wash hit him, smelling of kerosene and power. He watched the plane taxi away, sleek and beautiful, piloted by the woman he had deemed unworthy. He turned and began the long walk to the public gate, dragging his bag behind him. A king who had become a beggar in less than 20 minutes. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere had transformed. The toxic tension Richard had brought was replaced by the crisp, professional rhythm of a highly skilled crew. Steve settled into the left seat, but he didn't act like the boss. He knew who was sitting to his right. "Pre-flight checklists complete, Ms. Cross," Steve said respectfully. "I've updated the weight and balance to reflect the payload reduction." Nia chuckled as she keyed the flight management system. "Payload reduction. That's a polite way of saying we dropped 200 pounds of dead weight." "Ready for taxi," Steve said, suppressing a smile. "Teterboro ground, Gulf Stream 7 Alpha Quebec, ready to taxi with information Bravo," Nia radioed. Her voice was steady, calm, and utterly in control. 7 Alpha Quebec. Taxi to runway 19 via Kilo. Hold short of Lima. Nia guided the massive jet onto the taxiway. Her hands moved with fluid grace. She knew this machine intimately. She had spent nights studying the schematics not just to fly it, but to understand the asset she had purchased. They lined up on the runway. The engines roared to take off power. The force pressed them back into their seats. "V1, Nia called out. "Rotate." Steve pulled back on the yoke. The G650ER leaped into the grey New Jersey sky, piercing the cloud layer and bursting into the brilliant gold sunlight above. They climbed to 45,000 feet, leveling off in the smooth, thin air where only the best jets could fly. The ride was glass smooth. Once the autopilot was engaged, the cockpit door opened. Preston Sterling stepped in. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. "That," Sterling said, leaning against the bulkhead, "was the smoothest takeoff I have experienced in 10 years." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Nia said, turning in her seat. "We aim to please." "I have to ask," Sterling said, looking at her with genuine curiosity. "Why do you do it? You have enough money to buy this plane. You have a tech empire. Why put on a uniform and let dinosaurs like Caldwell talk down to you? Nia looked out the window at the curvature of the earth. When I sold my company, Cross-Link Systems, for $4 billion, I realized something terrifying. Everyone started saying yes to me. My staff, my lawyers, my friends. I lived in a bubble of agreement. She turned back to Sterling. I missed the truth. I missed knowing who people really were. So I got my pilot's ratings. I started flying the line for my own charter company incognito. It's the only way I can see how my employees actually treat people, how they treat the ground crew, the flight attendants, and their co-pilots. And Caldwell? Sterling asked. Caldwell was a test, Nia admitted. I saw his file. Great hands, terrible reputation with CRM, crew resource management. I wanted to see if the rumors were true. I wanted to see if he could put aside his bias for the sake of the mission. He failed, Steve interjected from the left seat. Spectacularly, Nia agreed. And now I know. I don't want men like him flying my planes. I don't want men like him representing my brand. Sterling raised his glass. To high standards. To clear skies, Nia replied. Sterling went back to the cabin, leaving the two pilots alone. So? Steve asked quietly after a moment. What happens to Richard now? Nia's face hardened. This was the hard karma she had promised herself. He thinks he's just fired, Nia said. He thinks he'll go home, drink a few beers, and get a job flying for a cargo outfit in a week. He's wrong. How so? While we were taxiing, I sent an email to the FAA Flight Standards District Office, Nia said calmly, checking the fuel flow indicators. I filed a formal complaint regarding his conduct, specifically intimidation of a crew member during critical phases of flight preparation and refusal to adhere to chain of command. I also attached the audio recording. Steve's eyes widened. You recorded it? The cockpit voice recorder is always on, Steve, but I also had my phone recording in my pocket from the moment he started yelling at the gate. Nia tapped the screen of her iPad. I also sent a memo to the National Business Aviation Association's Safety Committee. It's a small list, but influential. Richard Caldwell is about to find out that his reputation has arrived at every flight department in the country before he even gets home. Down on the ground, the karma was already hitting. Richard was standing on the curb outside Teterboro Airport. It had started to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle. He tried to order an Uber, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped his phone into a puddle. He picked it up, wiping it on his pants. A notification popped up. It was an email from his landlord. Auto payment failed. Then another notification. A text from a buddy at NetJets. Hey Rich, is it true? Did you really get tossed off a G650 for dropping the N-word on the owner? Dude, you're trending on the pilot forums. It's bad. Richard stared at the screen. Trending? He opened the browser. There was a thread on pilot rumors. The title, Captain Meltdown at TEB. Insults black female owner. Gets canned instantly. There were already 200 comments. None of them were supportive. Who is this dinosaur? Goodbye, career. I heard it was Nia Cross. She's a legend in Silicon Valley. This guy is toast. Richard felt his stomach churn. He sat down on the wet curb, the rain soaking through his expensive uniform trousers. He had spent 30 years building a career, and he had destroyed it in 30 minutes because he couldn't check his ego. He looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, at 45,000 feet, Nia Cross was flying at Mach 090, laughing with a billionaire. And he was here, in the mud. But Nia wasn't done yet. She had one more surprise waiting for him. Something that would ensure he didn't just lose his job, but that he would have to face the very people he had marginalized for years. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Teterboro. For Captain Richard Caldwell, they had been the longest 3 weeks of his life. But Richard was a man of immense resilience, fueled entirely by denial. He sat in the plush conference room of Thornton, O'Malley and Associates, a high-end employment law firm in Midtown Manhattan. The view of the skyline was breathtaking, almost as good as the view from a cockpit. "I'm telling you, Mr. Thornton," Richard said, leaning forward, his confidence returning. "It was a setup. She baited me. She didn't identify herself as the owner. She entrapped me into making regrettable comments. That is a hostile work environment. I want $5 million for wrongful termination and defamation." James Thornton, a shark of a lawyer in a three-piece suit, nodded slowly. "If what you say is true, Richard, that she was unprofessional and you were merely following safety protocols, we have a case. Vanguard Aviation is a private entity, but they still have to follow labor laws. We can bleed them dry." Richard smiled. He had convinced himself of his own lie. In his mind, he was the victim. He was the experienced captain pushed out by woke corporate culture. "She ruined my reputation," Richard added, feigning sadness. "I can't get a job. The forums are full of lies. I need this settlement to retire." The heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open. "I don't think there will be a settlement, Mr. Thornton," a voice said. Nia Cross walked in. She wasn't wearing a pilot's uniform today. She was wearing a crimson power suit that looked like it cost more than Richard's house. Flanking her were 2 lawyers from Baker McKenzie, one of the most feared legal firms in the world. Richard stiffened. You have some nerve showing up here." Nia didn't even look at him. She sat at the opposite end of the long table, placing a silver heavy-duty laptop on the glass surface. "Mr. Thornton," Nia said pleasantly, "your client has filed a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination and defamation. He claims I was incompetent. He claims I was aggressive. He claims he was protecting the safety of the flight." "That is our position, yes," Thornton said, eyeing the expensive lawyers behind her. "Richard has a history of selective memory," Nia said. "Fortunately, the Gulfstream GA-4IR has excellent memory. It's equipped with a cockpit voice recorder, which we are legally required to keep. But," she paused, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips, "my aircraft is also equipped with a high-definition flight deck camera system for insurance purposes, and the Teterboro hangar, 4K security surveillance with audio." Richard's face went white. He had forgotten about the hangar cameras. "You can't use that," Richard stammered. That's private." "Actually, Richard," Nia corrected him, "you sued me. You made this a matter of public record. You opened the door." She hit a key on the laptop. A projector screen descended at the end of the room. The video played. It was crystal clear. It showed the hangar floor. It showed Richard sneering. The audio was perfect. "You look like you should be handing out hot towels. Did dispatch run out of pilots, or is this some kind of diversity internship? Flying for rappers." Then the scene shifted to the cockpit. The camera angle was brutal. It showed Richard's face, twisted with hate, screaming at a calm, professional Nia. "I'd rather cancel the flight than sit next to an affirmative action mistake." The silence in the conference room was absolute. The video ended with Richard's walk of shame, dragging his bag across the wet tarmac, while Toby, the ground handler, shook his head in the background. Nia closed the laptop. "Mr. Thornton," Nia said softly, "I have already uploaded this video to a private server shared by the Professional Pilots Association. But since Richard is suing me for defamation, which implies I lied about his behavior, I am prepared to release this footage to the public news networks to prove that my statements were factual. CNN and Fox News are both very interested in a story about an arrogant pilot grounding a billionaire's flight due to racism. Thornton looked at the screen, then at his client. The lawyer's face hardened. He realized he had been lied to. He closed his file folder. "Richard," Thornton said, his voice cold, "you told me she was incompetent. You didn't tell me you racially abused the owner of the aircraft." I was stressed," Richard pleaded. "It was out of context." "The context seems quite clear," Thornton said, standing up. "I cannot represent you. We are done here. Get out of my office." "What?" Richard gasped. "But the settlement—" "There is no settlement, Richard," Nia said, standing up as well. She loomed over him, though she was across the room. "But I do have one final piece of news for you." "You've already ruined me." Richard slumped in his chair. "What else could you possibly do?" "The FAA reviewed the footage yesterday," Nia said, delivering the death blow. "They invoked Section 44709. They are re-examining your competence to hold an airman certificate. Given your erratic behavior, your refusal to follow chain of command, and your disregard for safety protocols, they are revoking your medical certificate on psychological grounds. You are permanently grounded, Richard. You will never fly a plane again. Not a Gulfstream, not a Cessna, not a paper airplane." Richard put his head in his hands. It was over. The sky was closed to him forever. 6 months later, the winter snow was falling at JFK International Airport. It was a busy night. Nia Cross sat in the back of her Gulfstream, sipping sparkling water. She had just landed from a business trip to Tokyo. She looked out the window at the chaos of the commercial ramp. A yellow shuttle bus pulled up alongside her jet to pick up the crew of a cargo plane parked nearby. The driver of the bus stepped out to help load the luggage. He was wearing a heavy neon vest, ear defenders, and a thick hat. He looked tired. He looked old. It was Richard. He grabbed a heavy suitcase, groaning under the weight. He was working for a ground handling service, minimum wage, graveyard shift, hauling bags for the pilots he used to look down on. As he tossed the bag onto the bus, he looked up. He saw the sleek G650ER. He saw the logo on the tail, Vanguard Aviation, and through the oval window, for just a fleeting second, he locked eyes with Nia. He didn't glare, he didn't sneer. He just looked down, defeated, humbled by the crushing weight of his own karma. A young supervisor, a Hispanic woman in her 20s holding a clipboard, yelled over the wind, "Hey, Caldwell! Pick up the pace! We got a schedule to keep." "Yes, ma'am," Richard shouted back, his voice cracking. "Moving as fast as I can." Nia watched him for a moment, then closed the window shade. She turned back to her laptop. She had a company to run. The pilot who refused to fly had finally been grounded by the only force stronger than gravity: the truth. And that is the story of Captain Richard Caldwell, a man who thought his stripes gave him the right to belittle others, only to find out that the person he was insulting signed his paychecks. It's a brutal reminder that in life and in business, you never know who you are talking to. Arrogance is a heavy baggage, and eventually you'll be the one forced to carry it. Richard lost his career, his reputation, and his passion because he couldn't see past his own prejudice. Don't be a Richard. Treat everyone with respect, whether they're the CEO or the janitor, because the tables can turn in the blink of an eye. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a co-worker who tried to sabotage you, only to have it backfire on them? Or have you ever been underestimated like Nia? Let me know your calmer stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served at 40,000 feet, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.